I've always been the adventurous type, so when I heard the rumors about the old abandoned house at the edge of town, I knew I had to check it out. They said it was haunted, but I dismissed those stories as nothing more than ghost tales told by bored kids. It was a foggy evening when I finally decided to explore it, a chill in the air that seemed to whisper warnings I ignored. As I approached the house, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark, dusty interior that seemed to breathe. The air was stale, filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing against the rotting floorboards. I stepped inside, feeling the weight of countless gazes upon me, as if the walls themselves were watching. I wandered from room to room, my flashlight beam flickering over faded wallpaper and furniture draped in white sheets. Then I found a photograph hanging crookedly on the wall. It was a family portrait, their smiles frozen in time, but in the corner of the picture, a shadowy figure lurked, its eyes glinting with something sinister. A shiver ran down my spine, but curiosity drove me further. I turned to leave, but suddenly the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Panic surged through me as I grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. That's when I heard a soft giggle drifting through the halls. Stay and play, the voice beckoned, dripping with a childlike glee that sent chills down my spine. My heart raced as I sprinted down the hallway, desperate to escape whatever awaited me. Each room I entered held more photographs, each depicting different families, but always with that same malevolent figure lurking behind them. I could feel its presence closing in on me, an oppressive force that filled the air with dread. I rushed to the door again, panic clawing at my throat, but it remained sealed tight. The giggling grew louder, more frantic, echoing off the walls like a haunting melody. In a moment of desperation, I turned and ran into what I hoped was the kitchen, but when I glanced at the mirror above the sink, my blood ran cold. Behind me stood the figure, pale, with hollow eyes and a wicked grin stretching across its face. My breath caught in my throat as it whispered, "Playtime forever." Darkness enveloped me, pulling me into its depths. I struggled, but it was like being swallowed by a void. My thoughts scrambled as I realized I wasn't just trapped, I had become part of this house's sinister history. Now I wander these rooms, lost in shadows, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon my prison, a warning echoing in the silence as I try to scream, "Don't come in." The night was unusually quiet as I drove down the winding country road, the headlights of my car slicing through the thick darkness. I was on my way to a friend's house for a weekend getaway, but I took a wrong turn and ended up in a secluded area I didn't recognize. The faint glow of an old sign read "Welcome to Harrington," a town that seemed to have been forgotten by time. Feeling uneasy, I decided to turn around, but before I could, I noticed a flickering light in the distance. My curiosity piqued, I drove toward it, hoping to find a gas station or a place to ask for directions. As I got closer, I saw it was an old, dilapidated diner, its neon sign barely illuminating the cracked pavement. I parked and stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling hollowly. The diner was empty, save for a grizzled man behind the counter, his eyes shadowed beneath a worn baseball cap. "Evening," he said, his voice gravelly. I nodded, glancing around at the faded photographs and dusty booths that seemed to be frozen in time. Can I get directions?" I asked, but he only nodded toward a booth in the corner, as if inviting me to sit. Feeling a mix of unease and curiosity, I obliged, sliding into the cracked vinyl seat. As I waited, I glanced at the wall adorned with old newspaper clippings. The headline sent shivers down my spine: "Missing, 5 locals disappeared, tragedy strikes, town falls silent." I felt a chill creep up my spine as the man approached with a cup of black coffee. "You'll want to be careful out there," he said, leaning closer. "Things aren't as they seem in Harrington." Before I could respond, the front door swung open with a gust of wind and the diner went cold. I turned to see a group of 3 people, 2 men and a woman, entering. Their faces were pale, and their eyes looked hollow. They didn't acknowledge me. Instead, they headed straight for the counter, whispering among themselves. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I watched them, a primal instinct urging me to leave. "You should go," the man behind the counter said, his tone suddenly serious. "Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I stood up, nearly spilling my coffee, and bolted for the door. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me, but I felt a strange warmth behind me. I glanced back and saw the group staring at me, their eyes dark and hungry, mouths twisted in grotesque smiles. I rushed to my car, heart pounding, fumbling with my keys as I felt the weight of their gazes. Just as I unlocked the door, I heard the man from the diner shout, "Drive, don't look back." I jumped into the car and slammed the door, starting the engine with a roar. As I sped away, I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The group was standing outside the diner, their figures flickering like a faulty television, as if they were struggling to remain anchored to reality. I didn't stop until I reached the highway, gasping for breath as adrenaline coursed through me. But the relief was short-lived. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching and my heart sank as they drew closer, the familiar shape of a car I had seen just moments before. I had barely escaped, but I was already trapped in a nightmare. The shadows of Harrington would follow me forever, hungry for more souls to join their ranks. Well, I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, so I thought. One chilly autumn evening, I decided to take a shortcut through the woods on my way home from a friend's house. The trees towered above me, their bare branches clawing at the sky, and the ground was blanketed in leaves that crunched beneath my feet. As I walked, I noticed a faint glow ahead, flickering like a distant candle. My curiosity piqued. I made my way toward it, weaving through the trees until I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. The door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze, inviting me inside. Despite the instinctive warning bells ringing in my head, I stepped in. The air was stale, filled with the smell of damp wood and mildew. Dust motes danced in the thin beams of light filtering through the cracks in the walls. The cabin looked as though it hadn't been touched in years, furniture covered in sheets, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling like ghostly veils. As I explored, I noticed strange symbols carved into the wooden walls, their meanings lost to time. I felt an unsettling chill creeping down my spine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then I heard a soft whisper, barely audible, drifting through the air. "Stay." I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, rattling the old hinges. Panic surged through me. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but my voice echoed back like a taunt. The whisper grew louder, wrapping around me like a fog, urging me to stay. Desperate, I ran to the window, only to find it barred with rusted iron. I could hear footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate, but no one was there when I peered out. My heart raced as I backed away, and that's when I saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, shrouded in shadow. I squinted, trying to discern its features, but it remained elusive, its presence suffocating. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed, a voice slithering into my ears. "You're ours now." I bolted for the fireplace, hoping to find an exit through the chimney, but the figure moved swiftly, blocking my path. The room began to spin as whispers grew into a cacophony, drowning out my thoughts. "Stay forever." With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged for the door once more, throwing my weight against it. Miraculously, it flew open and I stumbled outside into the night. But the forest was no longer familiar. The trees twisted and contorted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I ran, not looking back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers followed me, echoing in my mind, growing louder with each step. "You can't escape, you belong to us." Just as I broke through the tree lane and hit the main road, I glanced over my shoulder. The cabin stood silent, but the figure was now standing in the doorway, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I stumbled back, heart racing, but the road was empty, and my car was nowhere in sight. I felt it then, a cold breeze wrapping around me, pulling me back toward the woods. I fought against it, clawing at the ground, but the whispers were relentless. "Stay forever." When dawn finally broke, I found myself on the road, disoriented and shaken, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The cabin was gone, swallowed by the forest, and the whispers faded into silence. But I could still feel their presence, lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to wander too close. Growing up, I always loved exploring the abandoned buildings around my small town. They were like time capsules, frozen in moments long gone. One dreary afternoon, I stumbled upon an old asylum that had been closed for decades. The local legends were notorious. They said it was haunted by the spirits of those who had suffered within its walls. But I was feeling brave, perhaps a bit reckless, so I decided to venture inside. The heavy front door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit foyer that smelled of mold and decay. The walls were covered in peeling paint and dark stains, remnants of a violent past. I stepped cautiously inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. As I explored the ground floor, I found remnants of old patient records scattered across the floor, some pages yellowed and brittle. The further I went, the heavier the air felt, as if the weight of the past pressed down on me. I reached the first patient room, its door hanging ajar. Peering inside, I saw a bed stripped of linens, the rusted metal frame creaking softly as if it remembered the weight of countless bodies. I turned to leave but paused as I heard a faint whispering echoing through the halls. It was a soft, pitiful sound, almost like a child crying. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it and followed the sound down the corridor. The walls seemed to close in around me and a cold draft sent shivers down my spine. I approached another room, its door slightly ajar, and peered inside. There in the corner stood a figure, a girl, no older than 10, with hollow eyes and tangled hair. She was dressed in a tattered hospital gown, her skin pale and ghostly. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice barely more than a whisper. Fear gripped me, but I stepped inside, trying to reach out to her. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They won't let me leave," she replied, her gaze shifting nervously toward the dark corners of the room. "They want to keep me here." Before I could respond, the temperature plummeted. The shadows in the room thickened, swirling like smoke. The girl's eyes widened in terror. "You have to go. They're coming." Just then I heard heavy footsteps approaching, echoing through the hall. Panic surged through me. I backed away, glancing toward the door. "Where do I go?" I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. "Find the exit." "Don't look back," she urged, her voice rising in urgency. I turned and bolted for the door, my heart racing. The footsteps grew louder, heavy and relentless, as if something was chasing me. I sprinted down the corridor, the walls closing in, the darkness pressing against my back. I didn't dare look behind me. I could feel their presence, cold and malevolent, clawing at my heels. I burst into the foyer, my breath coming in gasps, and ran for the front door. Just as I reached for the handle, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I screamed and spun around, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive darkness that seemed to breathe around me. With one final push, I flung the door open and stumbled outside into the fading light. The fresh air hit me like a slap, and I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the street. I glanced back at the asylum, its silhouette looming ominously against the sunset. But the girl's voice lingered in my mind, a haunting echo. "Help me." I never returned to that asylum, but sometimes late at night I can still hear her whispering through the darkness, calling me back to the place where the shadows dwell, where the lost souls wander and time stands still.